Hell is empty, and all the devils are here. William Shakespeare. Columbine. On April 20th, 1999, two male students who attended Columbine High School in Littleton, Colorado, entered their school with guns and murdered 12 students and one teacher. I uncontrollably sobbed watching coverage as my precious 7-month-old twin boys napped. Sympathy overwhelmed me for all involved. I hated guns then as I do now. 21 years later, one of my beautiful boys was found dead in his home with a gunshot wound to the head. The animalistic, guttural mother's wail of total despair came out of my body when I received the news. When people experience unbearable pain, they often say, "I wouldn't wish this pain on my worst enemy." I do. I wish that pain tenfold on every single person who has voted for Republicans and their devastating laws with the purpose of hurting people they perceive as lesser than themselves. These hateful people are directly responsible for the trauma of millions of Americans. The only justice that currently exists in this country is for these monsters to feel the pain they have caused others. Over 100 Americans die every day due to gun violence. Epiphany. Even though I knew the truth about Christians from as far back as my memory reaches, I have always respected everyone's religious beliefs. Since I saw a piece of shit woman in an interview recently, I have absolutely no respect for so-called Christians. They are the exact opposite of what they claim to be. Nicole Ogburn, a Robb Elementary School teacher in Uvalde, Texas, who hid with her students when a gunman was in the school, told a reporter, "All I did was pray." She went on to say she doesn't believe guns are an issue. Most of Uvalde is Catholic. I'm sure most, if not all, of the victims prayed. What did prayer do for them? When I was 5, I asked a family member why a sick person died after the entire church prayed for her. I was told it was God's will. Even my young mind wisely deduced, if that's true, it is always God's will. There is no power in prayer. Nicole Ogburn, fuck you, you nasty wench. Not a theocracy. I had a vision of the great orange Trump standing on a national stage. The 10-year-old bully in a fat old body proudly said the N-word. Oh yes, we're getting closer and closer to these racist assholes saying the quiet part out loud. No more reading between the lines. They are becoming more and more emboldened with each day that passes. Since the leak from SCOTUS regarding overturning Roe v. Wade, Republican politicians have increasingly used religion in their interviews and speeches. Despite what uneducated Christians say, this country was not founded on Christianity. The first Christians who settled on the land that would become the United States of America left Europe because they were persecuted by other Christians. Later, the men who created this country were quite clear. This country is not a theocracy. It is political. Politics determine the quality of our lives. It sickened me to hear the soulless Texas Governor Abbott fail to take responsibility for his role in the massacre that happened in his state due to his unflappable allegiance to the NRA and gun manufacturers. He and his fellow lackeys unironically accused Beto O'Rourke, a politician fighting for common sense gun control measures, for politicizing the massacre. Conservatives across the country continue to allow themselves to be manipulated by violent, hateful Republicans who put money and power ahead of country. These useful idiots continue voting against their own interests because there's a trans female in some high school, in some city, in some state who wants to swim with cis females. Less than 1% of Americans identify as transgender. Fascists. I can't understand how Republicans are incapable of empathy. When strangers are in pain, my soul deeply hurts. I read about a study that was done a few years back that used MRI scans to see how Republicans think compared to Democrats. For example, they asked, "How do you feel about the homeless crisis in the country?" When Republicans contemplated the question, the part of the brain that processes fear lit up. For Democrats, the part of the brain that processes compassion lit up. Republicans, fascists, are capable of loving their family members. Does that make them good people, even though they consider other people to be less than human? No, they are in fact evil. To the halfwits who are actively working to destroy this country. When you are successful in making your fantasy a reality by making this country a fascist state, what do you think your lives are going to look like? Do you actually think all of the people who you believe are beneath you are going down without a fight? Let's say you are able to obliterate every person you hate once you successfully install dear leader Trump as king of the US. Do you think you'll be rich and happy? Do you think you'll be free? Do you think other countries will trade with this new shithole country you've created? What about the stock market? Who is left to do the critical work that illegals do now? Like all of you, Trump doesn't feel whole unless there are people he can look down on. You will be all that is left. Do you think His Highness Cheeto won't make you his slaves? Cleaning house. In 2016, after cleansing my life of conservative acquaintances and so-called liberal family members who enable fascists, I declared I will have nothing to do with Republicans for as long as I live. My personal life has been much healthier and more peaceful after ridding myself of cancer, both literally and figuratively. Even though I believe the fate of this country is hopeless, I vow to continue to do my duty as a true American and get in the face of Nazis when I encounter them. To QAnon whackjobs. 800,000 children do not get abducted every year in the U.S. 800,000 reports are filed for missing people every year. Less than 300 children are abducted by strangers each year. Don't you wonder why there aren't an additional 1.6 million parents screaming in the streets of Washington, D.C. year to year? Also, if the Clintons were juicing babies for anti-aging serum, don't you think they'd be in better shape? Seriously, just look at them. To the morally bankrupt Republicans, miss me with your bullshit about mental health being the cause of mass shootings. This country absolutely has a mental health issue. Having seen GQP members vote down bills to fund mental health, I can confidently say you are not sincere when you claim you want to fix gun violence or the mental health issue. Thoughts do not kill people. Your answer to stopping mass shootings is more guns? I'd suggest researching what these guns do to the human body, but it wouldn't matter. Evil runs through your veins. I truly believe you demons get off on the thought of children being gunned down. Americans do not have the constitutional right to own a gun. The Second Amendment literally reads, a well-regulated militia. All countries around the world have mental health issues. The citizens of other countries do not have access to weapons of war. If you were being chased through a field by a mentally ill person intent on hurting you, would you rather that person have an AR-15 or not have an AR-15? To the do-nothing Democrats, stop playing defense with fascists. You old, out-of-touch, rich asshats leading the Democratic Party are more interested in retaining power and reaching across the aisle to work with sociopaths than you are in improving the lives of Americans. You'd rather punch down at progressives who only want to improve the lives of those who are victims of a broken system then pass progressive bills to help your constituents. It's a slap in the face when you suggest meaningless solutions to mass shootings, like background checks and banning ghost guns. There's only one solution: outlaw weapons of war. You allow those sick Republican fucks to shame you for what us righteous progressives want for the country. Get woke, because Black Lives Matter. You are canceled. Voting is not a game. While the electoral system is a joke and most of our politicians are corrupt, voting is the only tool available to us to hold on to our freedom. If you are voting for Republicans because of fear of an imaginary boogeyman, you are destined to be affected by very real things you should have seen coming. Your hatred towards people for things that do not affect you or anyone else drives you to want to hurt them. I learned this very real Christian trait at an early age from family members who believe they can hate and hurt as much as they wanted because they can repent. Poof. Just like that, their God forgives them and allows them to live another week in sin, hurting others. I choose not to do bad things because I am an empathetic, moral human being. The Bible is deeply offensive for so many reasons. Any female with even an ounce of self-respect would not subscribe to this misogynistic nonsense. The God portrayed in this piece of propaganda is a brute. Christians enslaved my ancestors. Christians allow their children to be sexually abused by their Christian leaders. Our prisons are full of rapists and murderers who identify as Christian. Voting is also not a team sport. If a political candidate is clearly immoral, they do not get my vote. I would be responsible for what that candidate does and does not do. For example, Biden is and has always been a Republican. In 2020, it was not my responsibility to stop Trump. I have always called out hatred when confronted with it. For those so-called progressives who believe if you don't vote for Biden, you're giving Trump a vote. Do you regularly get in the face of people who are full of hate? Or do you believe in agreeing to disagree? Trump is not the problem. The problem is the people who support that sociopathic doofus. Trump exists because the friends and family who progressives refused to challenge demanded a fascist leader. These are the people I verbally put in their place my entire life. The silver lining of the Trump regime is that all the closeted racists felt empowered to scurry out of their holes. It's a good thing to know your enemies. I've been waiting for these imbeciles to tattoo a T on their foreheads to honor their dear leader Trump. Progressives who have kept quiet in the presence of dangerous vitriol are guilty of enabling. The signs that we would end up in a fascist state have been obvious for many years. I saw them. I did my part. It's been a lonely existence. Now, at the 11th hour, progressives with hair on fire want to fight for democracy? As cynical as I have become, I will go down swinging. There will be no camaraderie with cowards who buried their heads in the sand when it mattered. Uvalde. On May 24th, 2022, an 18-year-old man entered Robb Elementary School in Uvalde, Texas, with weapons of war and massacred 19 children and 2 teachers. Thanks to the relentless efforts of un-American Texas Republicans, he was able to purchase weapons legally. In fact, I guarantee most of the motherfucking cowardice cops who were scared for their own lives and refused to do everything in their power to help children during the Uvalde massacre voted for the fascists who created the laws allowing weapons of war to be owned by civilians. I heard a local reporter in Uvalde say, "This community is very conservative. The people are pro-Second Amendment and pro-life." I wonder how many family members of the children slaughtered at Robb Elementary School voted for the monsters who put the weapons of war into the shooters' hands. These Christians should be more concerned about the safety and lives of their children rather than trying to control the bodies of women they don't even know. Personally, I think of what will benefit those who are less fortunate than I am when I vote. I will fight for the right for anyone to believe whatever they choose. However, when your religious dogma infringes on my freedom, we have a huge problem. Also, the Bible says life begins at first breath. Christians really should read their fairy tale book at least once in their lifetime. To all who continue to say thoughts and prayers, turn around, walk away, and fuck all the way off. To protect and serve. What is the point of police officers? I grew up in a very violent community. I was a teenager when I realized they are worthless thugs who believe they are above the law despite taking the oath to protect and serve. In an emergency, I had to call 911 several times before cops bothered to show up. Cops are fucking cowards. All they are good for is putting up police tape. So I doubled down on fuck the police. After years of hearing about racist officers murdering innocent minorities. Since I have yet to hear from a single police officer admit that police culture is toxic, I double down on defund the police. In Uvalde, Texas, 40% of the city's budget goes to the inept police force. The community already didn't have faith in these bullies. Now that they left 19 children and 2 teachers to die in their classrooms because they are monumental pussies, I wonder if the murderous Republicans will still chant, "We need good men with guns in every school to combat the bad guys with guns." 19 incompetent cops waited outside classrooms for almost an hour while 10-year-olds called and begged 911 for help. The reality is, if someone is determined to hurt you, cops will not arrive in time to save you, and you will not have time to get your precious out of your holster to protect yourself. Spare me with your bullshit excuses. Enough. I've known very good people who lost hope and did bad things after a lifetime of experiencing injustice due to a system stacked against them. These people naively bought into the notion of kindness and civility. Being nice to demons who falsely claim to be God's children is asinine. While I never believed in compromising with the devil, I now thoroughly understand how these good people became broken. I was never really a fearful person, but beating cancer made me completely fearless. Hopefully, I'm very close to the end of my life. If I'm still here when the fascists officially take over, I wouldn't want to fuck with me if I were a Republican. A fearless bitch with nothing to lose is a poor choice for an opponent. The people I refer to as happy, happy, joy, joys. During my journey to find out about the gift curse I received, I came across many delusional people in the spiritual community who decided to just ignore all the bad things in the world that hurt their little fifis. They believe light always defeats darkness. Really? In my opinion, the 19 sweet little souls in Uvalde were light, destroyed by darkness. These nitwits are going to lose their shit when they realize new earth isn't coming and they see their world crumble around them. I have one regret. My cancer diagnosis came in 2016. This was the year the pity I had for all the selfish, simple-minded Republicans turned to resentment. When these morons took control of our government, I realized it was the beginning of the end that I had been anticipating. Intuition, common sense, and a degree in history allowed me to recognize the end of the democratic experiment. I regret fighting cancer. I'm stuck here to witness inevitable injustice. Over the past 6 years, I've witnessed a disturbing increase in violence against the LGBTQ community, Asians, blacks, Muslims, Latinos, and women in the name of Jesus. This phenomenon is textbook. History is repeating itself. Who's the person who so brilliantly said, when fascism comes to America, it will be wrapped in the flag and carrying a cross? If I believed in prayer, I'd pray for every person responsible for the downfall of this country to experience the most unbearable emotional pain imaginable. Humans suck. Humans are fundamentally bad. I personally believe only 5% of humans are altruistic, pure souls. Recently, I had a dream that I was pulled out of this life along with 5% of the population. They disclosed that we were put on Earth at a critical point to observe and experience humans in order to report back. Based on our reports, they would decide whether or not humanity would be allowed to continue. Too many have beliefs that are based on what they were told, not on personal experience. They blindly believe without proof. How can this civilization evolve when so many ignore science? It is insane to live life on this planet making life-changing decisions that affect others based on fantasy of what may possibly exist after life is over. We're beyond the tipping point. It's utterly hopeless. In Syria, as air raid sirens go off, this tiny brave soul forgoes his own safety to protect his sister, an even tinier pure soul. I think about this little one when I hear about selfish, weak, grown men performing cowardly acts.